The five-star restaurant buzzed with quiet luxury, polished silverware, low murmurs of conversation, and the rich scent of steak and fine wine filling the air. Jonathan Mercer, billionaire CEO of Mercer Tech, sat at his private table, scrolling through emails on his phone while waiting for his $500 Wagyu steak. Outside, the wind howled, carrying the bitter cold of the city's winter night. The restaurant's floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a street lined with homeless people, bundled in ragged blankets, seeking warmth in doorways. Jonathan barely noticed them, until a loud voice shattered the elegant quiet. "Don't eat that!" Jonathan's fork froze in midair. His head snapped toward the window, where a young homeless boy, no older than 10, stood outside, his face pale with terror. His clothes were tattered, his hair a tangled mess, but his wide brown eyes burned with urgency. The restaurant fell silent. Diners turned to stare. A security guard moved toward the door, ready to chase the boy away. Jonathan narrowed his eyes. What the hell is going on? The boy banged his fists against the glass, his breath fogging up the window. "Please, don't eat it. It's poison." A chill crawled up Jonathan's spine. How could this boy possibly know that? And why did he look so terrified? Something was very, very wrong. Before we continue the story, let us know, where are you watching from? The restaurant staff sprang into action. The manager rushed toward the entrance, motioning for security to remove the boy. "Get rid of him," he ordered. But Jonathan held up a hand. "Wait," he said, his voice sharp. "Let him in." The room tensed. Wealthy diners exchanged uneasy glances. A homeless child inside a restaurant like this? It was unheard of. The manager hesitated. "Sir, I assure you, this boy is just trying to cause a scene. I said let him in." Jonathan's voice left no room for argument. The boy was yanked inside, his small frame shivering from the sudden warmth. Up close, Jonathan could see the hollowness of his cheeks, the way his hands shook, not just from the cold, but from something else. The boy looked straight at him, his eyes pleading. "You can't eat that," he whispered. "Please." Jonathan's heartbeat quickened. He had seen many things in his life: ruthless businessmen, billion-dollar deals, betrayals, but never had he seen a child so utterly terrified over something so absurd. "What do you mean, it's poisoned?" Jonathan asked, keeping his voice level. The boy swallowed hard, glancing at the untouched steak on the plate. I can't explain, but you have to believe me." Jonathan studied him. The boy's clothes were torn, his hands stained with dirt, but his fear was real. The manager scoffed. "Sir, this is ridiculous. I'll have him removed." Jonathan didn't move. Instead, he reached for his steak knife and slowly cut into the meat. The boy gasped, his whole body flinching. "Stop," he begged. "If you eat that, you're going to die." A deep silence filled the restaurant, and for the first time in a long time, Jonathan Mercer felt fear creep into his chest. What did this boy know? Jonathan Mercer had faced his share of high-stakes situations, hostile takeovers, courtroom battles, billion-dollar betrayals, but never had he felt the kind of primal fear that gripped him now. The homeless boy in front of him trembled, his small fingers digging into Jonathan's wrist with desperation. The child's face was pale, his chest heaving, eyes darting wildly around the restaurant as if expecting someone to strike at any moment. Jonathan set his steak knife down slowly, his mind racing. This wasn't some random prank. The boy's fear was real. Jonathan's voice was steady but firm. "Who are you? And how do you know this food is poisoned?" The boy licked his cracked lips, hesitating. He glanced around, his eyes sweeping over the other diners, the staff, the manager. "I can't tell you here," he whispered, barely audible. Not in front of them. Jonathan's pulse quickened. Them? He repeated. The boy gave a small, jerky nod. And that's when Jonathan noticed it. The woman in the red dress, seated 2 tables away, had stopped mid-sip of her wine. She wasn't looking at her food. She wasn't looking at her phone. She was staring directly at him. The waiter behind the bar, tall, thin, with a blank expression, wasn't just cleaning glasses. He was watching them, stealing quick glances while pretending to wipe the counter. Even the restaurant manager, who had been so eager to throw the boy out moments ago, was suddenly too still. His expression was blank, but his fingers tapped against his clipboard in a strange, rhythmic pattern. Tap, tap, pause, tap, like a signal. A chill ran up Jonathan's spine. Something was wrong. Deeply, dangerously wrong. He looked back at the boy. Who are you, really? The boy swallowed hard. His fingers tightened around Jonathan's wrist. There's no time, he whispered. We have to leave, now. Jonathan exhaled, trying to think rationally. He was a man of logic, power, and control. He didn't make rash decisions. He didn't panic. But his gut told him, listen to the boy. He turned to the manager. Call the police. The man didn't move. Jonathan's jaw tightened. Did you hear me? Silence. Then the woman in the red dress stood up. The second she moved, chaos erupted. The kitchen doors burst open with a blood-curdling scream. A waiter stumbled out, his white shirt stained deep red, clutching his stomach. Another shout from the back. Dishes crashed to the floor. A chef ran forward, his face twisted in horror. Someone's dead, he gasped. The sous chef, he's... His words were cut off by the sharp sound of glass shattering. The woman in the red dress hurled her wineglass at the floor, the deep crimson liquid spreading like blood across the marble. She whirled toward Jonathan, her lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. And then she ran. Jonathan's instincts kicked in. He grabbed the boy's wrist and bolted. The restaurant erupted into chaos as he pushed through stunned waiters and panicked guests. Behind him, he could hear the pounding of footsteps. Someone was chasing them. The boy led him out the side door into the alley. The cold air hit Jonathan's skin like a slap, but there was no time to think. The boy turned a sharp corner, yanking him toward a narrow passageway between 2 buildings. Jonathan barely kept up. Where are we going? Somewhere safe, the boy panted. They won't stop now. You weren't supposed to know. Jonathan's chest tightened. Know what? He demanded. The boy hesitated, then said something that made Jonathan's blood run cold. The poison wasn't meant for you. Jonathan's steps faltered. His mind raced. If the food wasn't meant to kill him, who was it meant for? And more importantly, why? Jonathan's breath came fast, cold air burning his throat as he and the boy raced down the narrow alleyway. The dim streetlights flickered above them, casting eerie shadows against the brick walls. The farther they ran, the more questions swirled in Jonathan's mind like a storm. Who was this boy? Who was really supposed to die in that restaurant? And who the hell was after them? Behind them, the sound of footsteps pounded against the pavement, more than one set. Someone was chasing them. Jonathan tightened his grip on the boy's wrist. Where are we going? He demanded. The boy didn't answer. He only pulled harder, leading Jonathan through a maze of alleyways, weaving left, then right, then ducking through a broken fence. Jonathan, a man who had built his entire empire on strategy, calculations, and logic, was now running blindly, trusting a child he had just met. Finally, they burst out onto a quiet, abandoned street. The boy stopped abruptly, bending over, hands on his knees as he tried to catch his breath. Jonathan turned, scanning behind them. No sign of their pursuers. For now, he placed his hands on his hips, breathing hard. All right, kid. You need to start talking. Now." The boy straightened, still panting, but his eyes, sharp, intelligent, and terrified, never left Jonathan's face. "They were going to kill him," the boy whispered. Jonathan frowned. "Kill who?" The boy hesitated. Then he said a name that made Jonathan's stomach drop. "Victor Langston." Jonathan's entire body stiffened. Victor Langston, the Secretary of Commerce, a powerful government official, and, more importantly, a close friend of Jonathan's. Jonathan's hands curled into fists. "What the hell are you saying?" The boy swallowed hard. "That steak, it wasn't meant for you. It was meant for him. Someone wants him dead." Jonathan's mind reeled. Victor had been supposed to meet him for dinner tonight, but at the last minute, he'd sent a text saying he had to reschedule. Jonathan felt a cold sweat break out on his skin. If Victor had come, if he had eaten the steak instead, he would be dead. Jonathan stared at the boy, trying to process what he was hearing. "How do you even know this?" The boy's hands shook slightly, but his jaw tightened. "Because I heard them talking about it." Jonathan's eyes narrowed. "Who?" The boy hesitated, then finally said, "The people who took me." Jonathan felt a jolt of shock. "Took you?" The boy exhaled sharply. "I wasn't always homeless. A year ago, I was kidnapped by a group of men in suits. They kept me locked up in some kind of facility, made me listen to them talk about things I didn't understand. But I remembered names. I remembered places." Jonathan's pulse pounded in his ears. "And you heard them talking about poisoning Victor Langston?" The boy nodded. "I escaped 2 weeks ago. I was trying to stay hidden, but when I saw you at the restaurant, I recognized you. I knew you were supposed to meet Langston." Jonathan ran a hand down his face, his mind racing. This wasn't just a case of some kid making up stories. This was a targeted assassination attempt, one that had almost succeeded. 1,000 thoughts flooded his mind. Who was behind this? Was it political? A rival? A foreign entity? And most importantly, was Victor Langston still in danger? Jonathan grabbed his phone. He pressed Victor's contact and waited. 1 ring, 2 rings, nothing. Then, a click. A voice answered. But it wasn't Victor's. It was a deep, unfamiliar voice. "Mr. Mercer," the voice said smoothly, "you're asking too many questions." Jonathan's blood turned to ice. The boy stiffened beside him. He must have heard the voice through the phone. Jonathan gritted his teeth. "Where is Langston?" A low chuckle came through the receiver. "Let's just say your dinner plans weren't the only thing that changed tonight." Jonathan's fingers clenched around the phone. "If you hurt him—" "Oh, he's still alive," the voice said. "For now." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "What do you want?" The line went silent for a moment. Then the voice said, "We want you to stay out of this. Walk away, Mercer. This isn't your fight." Jonathan's pulse pounded. "And if I don't?" Another chuckle. "Then you'll end up just like him." Click. The line went dead. Jonathan slowly lowered the phone, his mind racing. Victor was alive, but for how long? His jaw clenched as he turned to the boy. "What's your name?" The boy hesitated, then lifted his chin. "Eli." Jonathan nodded. "All right, Eli, listen to me." The boy's brown eyes locked onto his, unwavering. "You're coming with me. We're going to find Victor." Eli's fingers tightened into fists. "And if they don't want us to?" Jonathan's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Then they just made a very big mistake." Jonathan exhaled sharply, gripping his phone so tightly that his knuckles turned white. His mind raced. Victor was alive, but for how long? Whoever these people were, they wanted him to stay out of it. That meant one thing. He couldn't stay out of it. He turned to Eli, whose wide brown eyes flickered with a mix of fear and determination. The kid had already been through hell. He had been kidnapped, held hostage, and had just saved Jonathan's life. Now, he was caught up in something even bigger. "We're going to find Victor," Jonathan said, "and we're going to stop whoever's behind this." Eli didn't even hesitate. "I'm in." Jonathan smirked. This kid had guts, but first, they needed a plan. Jonathan scanned their surroundings. They were standing on a dimly lit street far from the fancy restaurant where the chaos had started. No cars, no security, no safe place to regroup. He needed resources. He pulled out his phone again, this time dialing a number he hadn't used in years. The line rang once before someone picked up. A gruff voice answered. "Mercer," Jonathan allowed himself a slight grin. "Hello, Carson." There was a beat of silence. Then, a low chuckle. "Well, well, if it isn't the golden boy himself," Carson said. "Didn't think I'd hear from you again." "I don't have time for nostalgia," Jonathan cut in. "I need a location traced and a secure vehicle fast." Carson's voice grew serious. "What kind of trouble are we talking? The kind where people start dying if we don't move now." Another pause. Then Carson sighed. "Send me the number you just called. I'll get a trace on it. Where are you?" Jonathan quickly gave him their coordinates. "Stay put," Carson instructed. "I'll send someone." The line went dead. Eli was watching him closely. "Who was that?" Jonathan shoved his phone into his pocket. "An old friend." Eli didn't look convinced. "He sounded dangerous." Jonathan smirked. "That's because he is." 15 minutes later, a black SUV pulled up. The windows were tinted, the engine barely making a sound as it idled in front of them. The back door swung open, revealing a man in his late 40s, Carson Reed, former military intelligence, current problem solver for the ultra-wealthy. He had the look of someone who had seen too much. Short-cropped hair, scars on his knuckles, and eyes that missed nothing. "Well, I'll be damned," Carson muttered as he looked Jonathan up and down. "Didn't think you were the type to get mixed up in this kind of mess." Jonathan ushered Eli into the car before sliding in himself. "Trust me, neither did I." Carson's gaze flicked to Eli, then back to Jonathan. "The kid involved in this too?" "He's the reason I'm still breathing," Jonathan said. Carson raised an eyebrow. "That so?" Eli lifted his chin. "Yeah." Carson let out a dry chuckle. "All right then, kid. Let's see what we're dealing with." He pulled out a tablet and tapped the screen. "Tracked the number you called. Whoever answered the phone wasn't using a normal line. It was a burner routed through multiple proxies. But I did manage to get a general location." A map popped up on the screen, a blinking dot pulsing in the middle of the city. Jonathan leaned forward. "Where is that?" Carson's lips pressed into a thin line. "A private airstrip outside the city." Jonathan's blood ran cold. If they had Victor Langston at an airstrip, that meant one thing. They were planning to move him. Eli's voice was barely a whisper. "They're going to take him somewhere no one can find him." Jonathan made a decision instantly. "We're stopping them." Carson gave a low whistle. "You sure about that, Mercer? These guys aren't amateurs. You walk into that airstrip, you'd better be ready for a fight." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "I've never walked away from a fight when someone's life was on the line." Carson let out a sigh. "All right, let's gear up." He pressed a button on the console, and the SUV's hidden compartment slid open, revealing a stash of tactical gear, firearms, and encrypted comms. Eli's eyes widened. "Whoa!" Jonathan didn't even flinch. He grabbed a bulletproof vest, slid it over his shirt, and strapped a secure earpiece into place. Carson tossed him a compact pistol. "You remember how to use this?" Carson asked. Jonathan checked the magazine, cocked the slide, and gave Carson a pointed look. "What do you think?" Carson smirked. didn't think Mercer Tech's billionaire CEO still had it in him. Jonathan's eyes darkened. "They took my friend," he said, "and they almost killed me." He loaded the pistol. "I'm going to make them regret both." Eli, still watching, swallowed hard. "What about me?" Jonathan turned to him. "You stay in the car." Eli's brows furrowed. "No way, No." Jonathan's voice was firm. "You've done enough, Eli. You saved my life. You warned me about Victor. But this is too dangerous." Eli gritted his teeth. He hated it, but he knew Jonathan was right. Carson revved the engine. "All right, boys. Next stop, hell itself." As the SUV sped into the night, Jonathan's mind was clear. He had been many things in his life: a billionaire, a businessman, a strategist. But tonight, he was going to be a warrior. And if these people thought they could make him disappear, like Victor, they had no idea who they were dealing with. The black SUV roared down the highway, cutting through the darkness like a bullet. Jonathan sat in the front seat, gripping the pistol Carson had given him, his mind racing. Every second they wasted, Victor Langston was one step closer to disappearing forever. Carson kept his eyes on the road, jaw tight. The airstrip is about 10 miles out. If they're planning to move Langston, they'll do it fast. We need to hit them before that plane leaves. Jonathan nodded, trying to keep his emotions in check. He was used to power struggles, but this was different. This wasn't a business deal gone wrong. This was an assassination attempt, a government cover-up, and a missing man, all wrapped in one deadly package. And somehow, a homeless boy had become the key to it all. Jonathan turned to Eli, who sat in the back seat, looking tense but determined. "You sure you don't remember anything else?" Jonathan asked. Eli's fingers curled into his worn-out hoodie. "I told you everything I know. I was just a kid they took because I overheard something I wasn't supposed to. I never saw their faces. I just know they talked about Langston a lot." Jonathan exhaled. "Then that means he's more important than we thought." Carson pulled off the highway onto a hidden dirt road, the vehicle bouncing slightly as they hit the uneven path. A chain-link fence loomed in the distance, surrounding the airstrip. Through the darkness, Jonathan spotted a private jet parked near a hangar. "Damn," Carson muttered. "That's not a commercial charter. That's a ghost plane." Jonathan frowned. "What does that mean?" Carson tightened his grip on the wheel. "It means whoever owns that jet doesn't want it traced. No flight records, no black box, no paper trail. If they get Langston on that plane, we'll never see him again." Jonathan's jaw clenched. "Not on my watch." As they got closer, they saw figures moving near the aircraft. Armed men in dark tactical gear, escorting a hooded figure toward the stairs of the jet. Jonathan's pulse spiked. "That's him," Eli whispered. "That's Victor." Jonathan made a split-second decision. "We go in now." Carson snorted. "Oh, yeah? You and what army?" Jonathan cocked his pistol. "I don't need an army." Carson rolled his eyes. "You rich guys really love the dramatic lines, huh?" But before Jonathan could respond, a voice crackled over the SUV's radio. "Unknown vehicle. Turn around immediately." They had been spotted. "Guess we're doing this the hard way," Carson muttered. With one hand on the wheel, he reached for a shotgun tucked under the dashboard. "Hang on, Mercer," he said with a smirk. "Time to crash a party." Then he floored the gas. The SUV screeched forward, straight toward the jet. Gunfire erupted. Bullets pinged off the reinforced vehicle as Carson swerved, avoiding the worst of it. Jonathan braced himself, his mind in calculated chaos. 3 guards near the plane, 2 more near the hangar, 1 holding Victor. Jonathan grabbed the door handle, ready to jump out as soon as Carson got them close enough. "Go for the guy holding Langston," Carson shouted. Jonathan nodded. He had 1 shot. One chance to stop this. And then they were in range. Jonathan threw the door open, tucking into a roll as he hit the ground. The moment he was on his feet, he raised his pistol and fired. The bullet hit its mark, right in the shoulder of the man gripping Victor. The man staggered back, releasing his hostage. Victor Langston collapsed to his knees, dazed and weak. Jonathan ran for him, but more gunfire erupted from the hangar. Carson had jumped out of the SUV now too, laying down cover fire. Eli, still in the car, ducked low, eyes wide. "Jonathan!" Victor's hoarse voice barely made it over the chaos. He was weak, barely conscious. Jonathan grabbed him by the arm, pulling him up. "I got you." Victor's eyes fluttered open. They were going to... "I know." Jonathan cut him off. "We're getting you out of here." But then, the jet's engines roared to life. Jonathan's head snapped toward the plane. The remaining guards were retreating, climbing up the stairs, abandoning Victor. They weren't trying to kill him anymore. They were fleeing. Jonathan raised his gun, aiming for the jet's cockpit. But Carson grabbed his arm. "Let them go," Carson growled. "We got what we came for." Jonathan hesitated. Let them escape. Let them vanish into the night. But as he looked at Victor, pale, trembling, barely alive, he knew Carson was right. They had won this round. The plane lifted off, disappearing into the night sky. Jonathan exhaled, heart hammering. Eli stumbled out of the SUV, rushing toward them. "Is he okay?" Jonathan nodded. "He will be." Victor tried to speak, but his voice was weak. I heard them talking. "This isn't over, Jonathan. His body went limp. Jonathan caught him before he hit the ground. "We need to get him to a hospital, now." Carson wasted no time. He helped hoist Victor into the SUV while Jonathan pulled Eli inside. As they sped away from the airstrip, Jonathan's mind raced. They had saved Victor, but the people behind this were still out there. And whoever they were, they had made a mistake. They had let Jonathan Mercer live. And now, he was coming for them. The SUV sped through the empty roads, slicing through the darkness like a bullet. Jonathan sat in the back seat, gripping Victor Langston's limp body, his mind a storm of fury and calculation. Victor was alive, but barely. His face was pale, his breathing shallow. The people who had taken him, who had almost killed him, were still out there. And worse, they had resources, connections, power. Jonathan clenched his jaw. He had spent his whole life building an empire, playing chess at the highest level. He knew power when he saw it. And these people? They were dangerous. Eli sat beside him, his small hands gripping his hoodie, eyes flicking anxiously toward Victor. "He's not gonna die, right?" Jonathan shook his head. "Not if I have anything to say about it." Carson, hands tight on the wheel, grunted. "I've got a private doctor on standby. We'll be there in 5. The SUV roared down the road, tires screeching as Carson took a sharp turn. But Jonathan's mind was somewhere else. The plane, the assassins, the woman in the red dress. These weren't just hired guns. This wasn't a random hit. It was calculated, precise, powerful. And now, the people behind it knew that Jonathan Mercer was in their way. His phone buzzed. Jonathan pulled it out, eyes narrowing. Unknown number. He pressed accept, keeping his voice steady. "Mercer," a chillingly familiar voice answered. "I told you to walk away." Jonathan's blood turned to ice. The same man who had answered Victor's phone at the restaurant. The same voice who had warned him to back off. Jonathan leaned back in his seat, his grip on the phone tightening. "And yet here we are," Jonathan said smoothly. "Your people ran like rats. I saved Victor. You lost." A low chuckle came through the speaker. "Did I?" the voice murmured. "Look around, Mr. Mercer. You think you won? This is just the beginning." Jonathan's chest tightened. He glanced out the tinted window, and that's when he saw it. Headlights. 1, 2, 3 black SUVs following them. His pulse spiked. "Carson." "I see it," Carson muttered, checking the rearview mirror. Eli twisted in his seat, his eyes going wide with fear. "Are they?" Jonathan's knuckles turned white around his phone. "Seems like you've got company," the voice on the other end mused. Jonathan's voice was like steel. "Come after me all you want. But you made a mistake." A pause. "Oh? And what's that?" Jonathan's lips curled into a cold, deadly smirk. "You let me see your face." Silence. Then the line went dead. And behind them, the SUVs sped up. Jonathan's heartbeat pounded. "We're about to have a problem," Carson muttered. Jonathan's mind snapped into fight mode. There was no more running, no more hiding. These people had made one fatal mistake. They thought Jonathan Mercer was just a billionaire, but now they were about to learn exactly who they were dealing with. Jonathan rolled his shoulders, flexing his grip on the pistol in his lap. "Carson," he said. "Yeah? Drive faster." And then the chase began. Carson slammed his foot on the gas and the SUV lurched forward, tires screeching against the pavement. The 3 black SUVs behind them accelerated, headlights glaring like hungry wolves in the dark. Jonathan clenched his jaw, his pulse pounding. They weren't running anymore. This was a fight. Gunfire erupted from the pursuing vehicles. Bullets slammed into the rear windshield, spiderwebbing the glass but not shattering it. Bulletproof. But that wouldn't hold forever. Carson gritted his teeth. "Hope you're ready, Mercer, 'cause this is about to get real messy." Jonathan didn't hesitate. He turned to Eli. "Stay down." The boy nodded quickly, ducking between the seats, eyes wide with fear, but trusting Jonathan completely. Jonathan rolled down the window, gripping his pistol. He aimed at the tires of the first SUV behind them and squeezed the trigger. The bullet hit its mark. The SUV swerved violently, its front tire blowing out, sending the vehicle spinning. It crashed into the guardrail, flipping over in a shower of metal and sparks. 2 left. The second SUV pulled up beside them, its passenger leaning out of the window with an assault rifle. Jonathan barely had time to react before bullets shredded through the side of the SUV, missing his head by inches. Carson snarled, "Oh, hell no!" With a sharp turn, Carson sideswiped the enemy vehicle, sending it careening into a street lamp. The impact crumpled the front end, sending the shooter flying onto the pavement. 1 left. Jonathan shifted his focus to the last remaining SUV. "Hold steady," he shouted. He leaned out of the window, gun aimed directly at the driver. The man behind the wheel locked eyes with him. Jonathan pulled the trigger. The windshield exploded, the SUV jerking violently to the side before smashing into a concrete barrier. The hood crumpled, smoke pouring from the engine. Silence. Jonathan's chest heaved. His hands trembled around the gun. It was over. Carson let out a sharp breath. "Well, that was fun." Eli slowly sat up, his face pale. Did we win?" Jonathan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah, kid." He glanced back at the wreckage behind them, his mind racing. They had taken down the attackers, but this wasn't the end. Someone had sent those men, someone powerful, and they still didn't know who was pulling the strings. Victor Langston groaned in the seat beside him, finally stirring. Jonathan turned to him. "Victor, can you hear me?" Victor's eyelids fluttered open, his face weak and battered. He coughed, struggling to focus. He rasped. "They wanted me dead because I found out." Jonathan leaned closer. "Found out what?" Victor swallowed painfully. "It's bigger than I thought, John. Corruption, money laundering, powerful people I trusted. They knew I was going to expose them." His gaze flickered toward Eli. And this kid, he knows things they don't want getting out. Jonathan's jaw tightened. Everything clicked. Eli wasn't just a random street kid who overheard the wrong conversation. He was a witness, a liability to someone high up. And Victor? He had been the final piece of the puzzle until they tried to erase him. Jonathan clenched his fists. Not on my watch. He turned to Carson. We're going off the grid. Carson raised an eyebrow. You got a plan? Jonathan exhaled. He always had a plan. Victor needs medical attention, and Eli needs protection, he said. But I'm not waiting for them to come after us again. It's time we take the fight to them. Eli blinked. How? Jonathan's eyes hardened. We burn them to the ground. 2 weeks later, the headlines hit the news like an earthquake. High-level corruption scandal. Exposed. Shocking leaks shake political and corporate worlds. Government officials caught in cover-up. Billionaire Jonathan Mercer behind investigation. Mystery boy who warned Mercer. Who is he? The truth had come out. The corrupt politicians, the powerful elites, and the men who had tried to silence Victor Langston, they were finished. Jonathan Mercer had taken everything from them. And Eli, for the first time in years, he wasn't just surviving. He was safe. Jonathan had made sure of it. As the world reeled from the scandal, Jonathan stood in his penthouse office, staring out over the city skyline. He had won, but he knew this was only the beginning. Somewhere out there, in the shadows, more enemies waited, more corruption, more power-hungry men who thought they were untouchable. Jonathan smirked. Let them come. He was ready. If you loved this high-stakes thriller, don't leave just yet. Smash that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another heart-pounding story. Let's talk. What would you do if a homeless kid warned you about danger? Would you believe him? You uncovered a deadly conspiracy. Would you expose it or walk away? Powerful enemies came after you. Would you fight back or run? Drop your answers in the comments below. Let's see who's got the smartest survival instincts. Share this story with your friends. See what they would do in Jonathan's place. More jaw-dropping stories coming soon. Stay tuned.